Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Chris with InsideTheU. Just finished up with the first spring practice here for the Miami Hurricanes. First of 15 practices, spring game, April 18th at Cobb Stadium. Look, today was good in terms of seeing so many new faces, but not just that, it's so many different number changes with the returning players. But look, for me, it was all eyes on new quarterback Darian Mensah from Duke. I focused primarily on him, as I do typically with any type of high-profile player coming to their first practice for the Hurricanes. So I watched a lot of Darian, and during the viewing period, we didn't get to see the whole practice, which isn't typical. So we were able to see maybe 30 minutes, go through some periods, and video record that as well. But, you know, I thought Darian looked good. He looked in control, kind of watching him on some quick throws. We saw a little bit of that. I saw a drill with the quarterbacks working on some quick throws, getting the ball out quick, and whether it's finding Malachi Tony, certainly a good option. Good to see Malachi as well. But again, with Darian, a lot of the players, like 4 players talked after practice, as well as Coach Cristobal. Interviews are already on the channel, but Mark Fletcher, a couple offensive linemen, and Ryan Rodriguez and Matt McCoy, and safety Zachary Poyser. But the players just talked about Darian's ability to extend plays. They also are very confident that he's another one of these good quarterbacks, as everybody is expecting him to be this season. But just the play extension was something that all the players talked about when they talked about Darian, and being a professional. And I think that's what you hear, that's what you heard, that's what I've heard about Darian as well, even talking to some of his Duke teammates as I posted interviews with those guys on the website. But I think that's what's great about Darian. And, one of the things that came across my mind with this team, and I had a chance to sit down with Greg Olson when I asked him when we were in Indianapolis together for the combine there, and went to one of his events. And, one of the things I asked him was kind of the keys or the goals for this team. And it has to do with this team is not necessarily guaranteed, or certainly not guaranteed to have another successful season. Certainly everybody's hoping that. They are expected to, based on their win projections at 10.5 right now. And with a lot of returners, the key guys coming in, but it's not a given. And I think in sports, sometimes you assume you're going to have a successful team the next season when you already had a successful year. And when I asked Greg about that, he said he actually asked Mario about that at an event they were together in New York. And so that's been on my mind. And I think that is going to be a challenge for this team in one way, because again, I just think it's natural that any team, any successful team, they expect to go back, they expect to do the same things, or certainly this team is hoping to do even more and complete it with the national title after making it to the game last year. But one of the things, as I've been thinking more about it, thought about it today, is there's just so many new faces on this team. And yes, you've got your guys like Fletcher and Tony, and you've got some guys on the defensive side. But you have so many new faces that maybe that's going to help with that kind of thing to address, because it is a new team. And, Mark said it too. Look, 2025, and Poyser said too, 2025 is in the past a great season, but they all are working towards 2026. And maybe that's going to help because so many new transfers in, and even the guys returning. But on the offensive line, you've got guys returning in Sampson and Matt McCoy, who today at practice, and McCoy has said he's just making that transition to right tackle, and we'll see how that goes. He has been a tackle in the past after playing left guard with Sampson last year, splitting time. But those guys are going to be in new roles, some lead roles, expected lead roles for both of those guys. So that even with the returners, you're getting some role changes. So the ability to be, or maybe that complacency, or just the expectations that automatically that this team will be back and be successful. And it's great to be confident. Obviously, you want every team to be confident, but maybe that's going to be some of those things that help alleviate some of the issues you could have potentially with the team that was successful the year before. Just something to kind of think about with this team. And, I'll be curious to see how how Coach Cristobal talks about this team throughout the spring. And certainly Coach Cristobal doesn't want that with this team, and he's not going to be one to preach that with this program. But it could be something that they do have to address. So again, spending most of my time focused on Darian Mensah, but obviously I was able to watch some of the other drills as well. It'll just be a little bit different today for me personally compared to the other practices coming up, where I'll be able to focus more on different position groups. Drop in the comments below some position groups you really want me to focus on. But I'm fascinated to hear how things go with the offensive line. I think there are certainly question marks. Now, they can be answered in spring ball, and you're certainly hoping so, but I think it's understandable with how good the line was last year, how much experience. You had the top flight guy in Maui Noah, and we'll see how that offensive line kind of goes throughout the spring. But so I'll be focused on them, but also things in the secondary, focus on those guys. Bryce Fitzgerald, a great freshman year. I think he's going to be the guy that kind of takes Keontae Scott's spot in the nickel. I think he'll be given kind of that first look as kind of an option, kind of a guy that knows Coach Heatherman's defense, but also a versatile guy. Even during the recruiting process, he was a guy, was he going to play corner? Was he going to play safety? Based on some things he does. I remember talking to him, he does like the safety spot, but this gives him, a playmaker, ability to make plays out of that nickel spot, so that might be a good spot for him, especially with the other guys that they have. I think the other corners that they have returning, I think all those guys are essentially kind of true corners, and I think Poyser's more of just that natural safety, and we'll see how things kind of fit in with that second safety spot. But I think Fitzgerald certainly is going to be one of those guys to watch for in the spring. I only briefly spoke about Malachi Toney earlier, but I do want to say it was good seeing him out there. The jersey change, number one. One thing that was kind of great to see, I just think back on a year ago at this time, some people were excited about Malachi, but certainly didn't know what to expect with him. But look, he's certainly the leader of this group in terms of all eyes on him. He was first in line in the drills. He repped the drills well. He's one of these guys, still coming in early, puts in the extra work. A student of the game. I'll have more on that later this spring with Malachi. But it was also good kind of seeing him catch passes from Darian kind of as they develop their connection. So just on air that we did see some deep routes as well on some one-on-one situations, or the half field drill that we see quite typically with we have the viewing period. But it was just kind of good kind of seeing Darian and Malachi kind of work on their connection in the spring. I think it's going to be big. It's something that we talked about quite a bit with Cam Ward 2 years ago, it being big in the spring. And then Carson Beck just didn't have a spring because he was out with the injury. So Darian's here, full participant, and looking forward to seeing him connect with the receivers. It's going to be a competitive group with those guys coming in, not just Malachi, but they got Cooper, you also have Cam and just Dre. These guys are looking to make a name for themselves in addition to the returners. Coach Cristobal mentioned Dalen Upshaw, a guy that made a big play in the Syracuse game, and certainly he's looking to elevate and kind of keep himself amongst those top guys at wide receiver. Flipping it back over to the defensive side of the ball, Chase Smith at linebacker. Mario Cristobal mentioned him as the first linebacker in terms of who's going to fill in for Wesley Basaint. You bring back Mohamed Toure there. And Coach Cristobal again mentioned Chase Smith, and he's a guy that changed his number to number 9, but was very complimentary of him. He listed the other guys as well, but the way Cristobal spoke about him, and Chase, we did see him there in the mix at the end of the season and kind of a rotational guy, but it seems like he's going to be the guy there at that second linebacker spot, at least right now, and that'll be something to watch for in terms of his progression. He's been here a long time, a lot of experience, and and how he'll play together with Toure. That'll be something I'll be paying a close attention to. But as of right now, it certainly seems like Chase Smith is a leader of that group, trying to fill in for Wesley Basaint, who has departed now. As always, it was great hearing from Mark Fletcher after practice. He interviewed with the reporters, talked a long time about these guys. He's really glad all the running backs decided to come back. All their top guys came back. So it'll be a competitive group, not just with Fletcher, but you got Jordan Lau, Gerard Pringle Jr. saw his burst today in that new number 0 jersey, but saw his burst in kind of the inside run drill and thought he looked good. And we saw flashes last year, led the team in rushing those last few games of the regular season. So with him, and like I said, with Lyle and as well, I think these guys, Marty Brown is back. So certainly Fletcher's going to be the leader of this group, and he should be given the bulk of the carries. But these other guys are certainly looking forward to having key roles, and it's going to be a competitive battle. Curious how things go for each of them in the spring, and we'll see. One of the things that was interesting that Mark said after practice was just that he feels like it wasn't that he got healthy for his playoff run. He felt like he just had a change in mentality, and just talked about that a little bit. And he talked about kind of this year, kind of continuing to be a key leader for this team. Essentially he said, even if he's not necessarily feeling the most up for it each day, he knows his responsibility for this team, and he takes on that responsibility as one of the key leaders. Another group that I only watched a little bit today that I look forward to watching more throughout spring practices is the defensive line. Coach Cristobal said Ahmad Bowden essentially going to be out for the spring, and he said also too, not going to hold, they don't believe in necessarily holding guys out, but he's dealing with a real injury, and we saw Ahmad deal with that, battle through it at the end of the season, so he's dealing with that, so he might not be out here for the spring. But the other defensive linemen, in particular what we see at the edge position as the team tries to fill the hole left behind as Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor moved on. Hayden Lowe, all eyes on him. He's been a guy, showed sparks and flashes last year, gets hurt in preseason, doesn't play this year, but he's ready to go, and saw him out there today, so no worries about him. But then you bring in Damon Wilson. Mensah was the headliner on the offensive side of the ball, as a headline on the offensive transfer headliner, and then Wilson is their top defensive incoming transfer. And I think the way it kind of lines up, they're very similar in terms of that rush end spot, kind of playing the same position it looks like. But Damon Wilson will be one of those guys that will be expected to have a good year. And talking to his Missouri teammates, guys on the defensive line with him last year, and Zion Young and McClellan, both of them are very complimentary of Damon and look for him to have a big year here at Miami. And Miami obviously is hoping for a big year out of him. But I think he's going to continue to provide that rush end position, that production at that spot. I think we're going to see that, and I'm looking forward to kind of watching him more, as I mentioned earlier, just watching him more throughout spring practices. And then we'll see Armando Blunt, is he going to take that next step? Watching Justin Scott today, I think everybody saw him take that a little bit of a jump, a jump last year. Can he elevate again, be one of the best defensive tackles in the ACC? And we'll see. I think more reps, spring practices will be big for him, but being one of those top guys in the conference, I think, is the next step for him. But that is going to wrap everything up for me. Again, focused on Darian Mensah primarily today. Just wanted to get my eyes on him and get video. Stay tuned to the channel. I have video highlights of him, everything that I got to see today, so definitely check that out. But again, looking forward to seeing the other position groups more in totality throughout spring practices. Back out here again on Thursday. Expected to have a viewing period, hopefully, for that. And again, just kind of staying more in tune for the team. And as I mentioned earlier, let me know what position groups you really want to hear about next. I'm curious about the wide receivers more, learning more about them. Poyser talked about his connection that he had with Cam Vaughn when they were at Jacksonville State, so it's been good reconnecting with him. They were actually living right next to each other when they were there. So again, it's just great to be back out at spring practices. And also definitely stay tuned to the channel. I will have an update on the indoor practice facility. I know some of you have been asking about that, and it's been time. It's been about a month since the last update, so I'm looking forward to kind of showing you and talking a little bit about where they're at in that process. But definitely thanks for watching. Thanks for showing your support. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Again, road to 30,000 subscribers. Definitely looking forward to that. But I got to keep grinding. Have a good rest of the day, and take care.